I think I'm recording. Okay, good deal. All right, hang on just a second.
So this white ticket is how far the tail sticks out?
No, I'm gonna tell you about that in just a second. Okay, so tonight, y'all, we are tying a Seaducer. For those of you that don't know the history of a Seaducer, it was created by a guy named Homer Rhodes back in the 40s, and he was a commercial snook fisherman. And he created this fly to fish commercially in the Northeast for snook. And it became really a popular pattern around saltwater fishermen. And Chico Fernandez, famous guy from the 70s, well, 80s, 90s, 2000s, written several books. He popularized it and renamed it a Seaducer back in the 80s. And so since then, it's been known as a Seaducer, or Seaducer rather, excuse me. Could be the other too, I'm not totally sure. But a lot of variety in how we're going to fly it, or how we're going to tie it. I'm going to tie an olive because it shows up pretty well on the camera here. Of course, any combination of color that you want. We have purple here. Some of you may have white. We've got a little red. It also has optional flash on it, so as much flash as you care to use. This copy does not have any flash on it, so it's totally up to you whether you tie in flash or not. Also, another option on the flash is you may notice this flash is tied inside of the feathers. So the flash is tied on first and then the tail feathers. Whereas this copy, the tail is tied in first and then the flash. It just depends on what look you want. We're going to tie it like this. But you may see some YouTube videos where they tie the flash on first and it puts the flash inside the tail. So it's just kind of personal preference on it. And of course, this is 4 saddle hackle feathers. And for the tail, you want to pick some that are relatively narrow. That's not a great example, but as straight as you can find and fairly narrow like those. And for the hackle, you want something thicker and wider like this feather. This would not, I mean, you could use it for a tail. It'd just be a lot wider tail. It just depends on, and it'd be fine for like a size 1 or 2 hook. The first thing we're going to do is go ahead and we're going to prep our 4 tail feathers. And here, and I didn't send y'all one of these on the Zoomers, but this is a 2.5 inch long piece of paper. So if you've got a ruler handy, we're going to cut these tail feathers 2.5 inches from the tip. We're going to cut them off at 2.5 inches. So we're going to cut them off there. And then, second step of prep, so we have it cut off, is we're going to pull out the last, 1/4, 3/8 of an inch of the feather barbs, and then cut them off short like that. You can see there, yeah, there you go. You can see they have little barbs sticking out. So go ahead and do that to 4 of your feathers and just lay them aside. So we'll have 4 cut to a 2.5. Now, if you don't have a ruler handy, it's about 1, 2.5 hook lengths total. So from the front of the hook to the back, a full length and about 1/2 another. That's 2.5 inches. Okay, let's get those cut. Strip the little barbs out. So we have like that. Whoops, there we go. And again, when you're picking your saddle hackle for the tail, you want it straight's not really critical. It just makes a neat looking fly. Because once it gets in the water, it's going to get wet. Have some really good, that saddle hackle has really good action in the water. And this fly, being unweighted, will run just under the surface of the water. Okay, I'll do one more, and then we'll start tying. This takes as long to prep the tails as it does to tie the fly. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get a hook in the vise. This is almost any hook will work for this. This is a Gamakatsu B10S in a size 4. I've tied a lot of them for saltwater on Mustad 34007s and 2, like for redfish. It's a stainless hook, coated stainless hook, so the old Mustad 34007, or I think it's SR71 something's the new number on it. Anyway, it's the Mustad standard saltwater hook in size 2. But this is also a really good freshwater pattern, so we're going to tie it on a B10S. And since I'm tying olive, I'm going to use olive thread. I'm using 140 denier ultra thread, but almost any thread will work. Now 70 denier probably won't give you enough strength to really bear down on it. And so go ahead and lay down a thread base on your hook back to B10S. The bend starts pretty quickly on a B10S, as you can see here. So really kind of about halfway between the barb and the tip and the point of the hooks where we want to stop. Okay. And then bring your thread back up. I want a little bit of a gap between the point, about a hook eye gap between the point of the hook and where my thread's hanging. Because we want to tie those feathers up toward the front just a little bit. And by doing that, we sometimes can get away with only one saddle hackle to do the hackle in the front. Sometimes it takes 2. Just depends on how long your hackle is in the front. So we tie in 2 on each side of the hook, and you'll notice that they have a slight curvature to them. You want to line them up where the curvature matches, like mine do. If one's going one way and one's going the other, just flip them to where the curvature matches. And I like to tie these where that curvature faces away from the hook shank. So basically the feather flares out at the back instead of flaring in.
You want to flare down or flare up?
It doesn't matter to me, John. I mean, I don't think it matters at all. I generally tie mine where they're like this, where the bend is down a little bit, but that slight curve goes out. And so you just line your 2 hooks up. That black shirt's hard to see against. I go lighter. I thought it would be better, but it's kind of hard to see.
Because it's green instead of white.
Yep. I should have done a white feather. Yep, I'll do the next copy in white. So line up those 2 and line it up where, let me zoom in a little bit here if I can. Yep, there we go. Line it up where your thread is just at the base of the part you've cleared here. And it should be semi-parallel. And we take a loose wrap, take a couple of more loose wraps, and then start taking some tighter wraps. That helps keep it from rolling around the hook, so it's kind of lined up, as you can see, with the hook shank. Now, the guys on the internet, you'll see them, theirs are 2 perfectly splayed out, everything's lined up. Well, let me tell you, that's a pain to do on this fly. So I'd never really worry about how closely they're aligned or how parallel. I try to get them there, but usually there's one may be flat, one may be angled. But when it gets in the water, that kind of random angle of those feathers really gives it some good action. So I have those 2 tied down, and so now I'll take my thread back to the base of that feather right there, because I'm going to do the same thing with the feathers on this side. I'm going to take my other 2 and tie them on the near side of the hook. And again, you try to get them lined up. See, those two are not lined up. They're splayed opposite each other. So I don't want that. I want to flip it over. And now they're laying flat against each other. And that curvature I'm going to tie where it's away from the hook shaft. Again, a couple of loose wraps. And a little bit tighter wrap. And you'll see I have this top one kind of laid a little bit flat instead of down on the side. That's perfectly okay. It doesn't have to be perfectly parallel to each other. It'll fish really just fine. But you can twist on them, and that's cleaner than most of the ones I tie. So that's kind of what, if you look top down on your fly, that's sort of what they should look like. And again, if they want to spin around the hook on you and one's on top, one's on the bottom, one's on the side, that's okay, because it'll fish maybe even better that way. Flip, Peter, Mark, y'all doing okay?
Yes, sir. Yeah, hanging in there.
All right.
Right.
Peter, this ought to be good for some of that lake fishing you're doing up there. I mean, it's like it'll run probably less than 6 inches, or around 6 inches under the surface once it gets wet.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah. All right, now it's time for flash, and the amount of flash is totally a personal thing. This is probably a little more than I usually use, but who cares? It'll be fine. Now, the way I like to do the flash on this, I want to take my thread just a bit forward of where the base of my feather is, kind of past the tips of those feather shafts. So anywhere up in here. And roughly I have 6 strands here. I'm going to take one of those out. I think that's a little too much. That's kind of a Mike Carlin amount of flash there. All right. And roughly in the middle, I'm going to fold it under.
Are you doubling them?
Yeah, I've got 5 strands.
How long is the piece?
This piece I've got, I just took a full foot long strand, cut it. You can cut that in half, and have 2. You can do 2 flies out of that. So I'm on about the middle here. I'm going to wrap it under the shaft of the hook, like that. And my thread's behind it, and then all I have to do is lay it down, take a couple of wraps, and then I can take my 2 halves and separate them down each side, like that. And then I can hold them and then wrap over them like that. And now they go down each side. Each side. If you're really have a lot of dexterity in your fingers, you can keep a finger between the 2 halves and pull it back tight, but I'm not quite that good. And we want to cut it just a hair about the same length as the tail, maybe just a little bit longer. So now you have feather or flash going down each side of the tail. Now again, as I mentioned earlier, this is an optional way of doing it. You could have tied the flash on first, then tied your feathers on, if you wanted the flash to be inside the tail and a little more subtle.
Split the side, make it right. Can you go to both sides? Yeah.
Okay, we're going to give everybody a little chance and trim it just about the same length, or maybe a tad longer than the tail. And that's probably too much flash. I don't know. It's for fresh water, it's probably fine, but
It's no water, that stuff pulls.
it does. And this is Krystal flash that we're using. Polar flash works real well. Just plain old Flashaboo works as well too. Just the smaller Flashaboo, not the saltwater stuff. But Krystal Flash has that nice Christmas light look to it. Okay, tails and flash on. All right. Find one of your larger feathers, something like this one. And some of the copies you'll see on the internet, and I tied one just so you see what it looks like. This one actually, I wrapped all the way up into the marabou on the feather. This is the marabou portion, this fluffy part down here. And you'll see some on the internet where people do that. And I'm sure it just doesn't look as good to me, but I'm sure it looks great in the water. But so since I don't like it, I'm not going to do it. So I'm gonna pull that marabou off. That's right, it's my flies. Cajun Ninja Cook says you do you.
Using the same color that we used.
I am, but I generally tie something different. Like this is red and white, or this is chartreuse and white. You can tie purple and olive. You can tie purple and red. Yeah, yeah. So I stripped the marabou and I have now a hackle feather. And just like kind of like we did with the base of our tail feather, we want to pull these fibers down as straight as we can get them. Just run your thumb down. Because if you've ever tried to palmer saddle hackle, it is a pain and it doesn't palmer well. That's why it's cheap. It's not like nice like grizzly saddle for woolly buggers or something like that. This Chinese saddle hackle is not.
So how long is the piece? We use the top piece, right?
Yeah, just I wouldn't cut it. I'd strip that marabou off. Because that'll give you something.
Okay.
That'll give you that stem to hold to as we wrap it. So that's what I have. Mine's roughly, it doesn't matter. Mine's, by the time I cut it, it's going to be about 4 inches of actual hackle. Now, likewise, you'll notice this feather also has a curve to it. I want to we're going to tie in by the tip, and I want to tie it in by that tip where the curve, the concave part of it, is toward the hook. Now, once you start wrapping saddle hackle, it twists like the dickens, so it's likely to twist the other way. So, but it doesn't really matter. But we're going to start it with the curve toward the hook. And I've pulled the feathers back because this is really fragile up here at the front, that piece. So I'm going to tie in right at the base of that. So I'm tied in right at the tip. And I'm going to pull that tip back and take a couple of wraps in front of it. I want to make sure it doesn't slip off. And then I'm going to trim that tag end of the feather off. Right there. Just like that. So now I've tied in by the tip. See, it's already starting to look messy. Okay, move the thread forward to roughly somewhere behind the eye. We hope we'll get that far with it. So I move my thread forward to behind the eye. And then we want to try to twist that saddle hackle where that curved section is toward the back of the hook. And we just start wrapping that hackle forward. Yep. And fairly close, almost touching wraps, but doesn't have to be touching. And if your hackle starts to, like mine is right here, if it starts to lay down on itself, reach down there and just kind of pull it straight up the shaft of the feather. So just kind of pull it up, just like that. Yeah, it's wanting to see. It really is a fairly messy hackle, but once it gets wet, it lays back nicely in the water. See, that did not work out good there. All right, there. Sometimes you may have to sweep it back and hold it back with your fingers to get it to wrap good, because it has those long fibers that will want to trap each other. And see, I think mine's actually twisted because I think my curve is now facing forward. But that's fine. Again, this stuff is so flexible. It's not like dry fly hackle where you really have to pay attention to which direction it is. This will lay back in the water just fine. And I looked out on this one. It's enough feather to go all the way forward with it. Yep. Sometimes you have to use two. And you just tie another one in by the, if you do, just tie another one in by the tip and keep wrapping. Now, once I get here, I don't know if you're there yet, but I'm holding my stem. And this is why I like to peel that marabou off, because now I have clean stem to run my thread down against. I don't have all that marabou that'll trap around the eye of the hook and all that. So I'll take my thread and just do a couple of good wraps right behind, probably about 3 behind that stem. Pull that stem back and everything else back if I can. And just build a small head right in front. And reach in and cut that stem off close. Like that.
Good. Hanging up with my thread kind of towards the back of the.
Before you start.
And then I'm going to whip finish this. Just build a little thread head on it.
Should have had it brought up.
What is it? Brought it back up to right behind the eye.
And then do what you did. That looks good. And then wrap it up.
Do your whip finish and trim. And if you have head cement, go ahead and use that on it. Oops, I got a little feather. Yeah, be sure you clean the eye out with your head cement.
Right.
Yeah, when the fish are biting the best, and you have to change flies, that's when you're going to grab the one that has glue in the eye. Okay, there we go. Oh yeah, you could easily throw this on a 4-weight. It doesn't weigh anything. Now, if you catch a 10-pound fish with this on the 4-weight, that might be a little more interesting. But
What about that one?
Flip, you ever fish this in the salt?
No, I used them for bass.
Yeah. And they ride so high in the water. I mean, even they'll go right on top of a weed bed.
Yeah. Just depends on how patient you are if you want them to go down.
Yeah. Yep. All right.
They'll eventually sink.
Yeah, it's kind of like a lefty deceiver or something. If you let it, or even like a bad hair day, which like Jim and I fish a whole lot, you have to kind of beat it on the water and get it wet before it starts to sink. But if you let it sink, it'll get on down there.
Yeah, squeeze it in the water like a sponge.
Mm-hmm. And that is it. Now, Catch ties a version that he calls his SR71 Seaducer, and I think the only difference, y'all can correct me, those of you that know, is that instead of saddle hackle for the hackle, he uses schlappen, which is even more limber, and it lays back. The actual head will lay back probably this far to the back of the hook.
That's what I did.
Yeah, I see it. Hang on. Let me use schlappen on it. Let me spotlight yours real quick. Okay, there you go. That's how Catch what he calls his SR71 Seaducer. Schlappen's a lot thicker. And if you're going to buy hackle to do this, I'd say buy schlappen. I like the grizzly tail too. That's nice. Cool. Looks good. Real good. All right. Okay.